According to a controversial 2001 study, the smell of the Phallus indusiatus mushroom causes spontaneous orgasms in over 1 woman in 3.
This is Exploring Unusual Sex, the podcast about odd stuff that helps understanding everyday matters. Our host today, from Milan, Italy, is author, journalist and personal coach Ayzad.
Welcome! In this episode we talk about gay brothers, sexual fluidity, cicisbeos, the world's strangest porn, and much more. Let's get starting, and the first topic is fetishisms. One observation I really love says, fetishists are like poets. They can find immense pleasures in details others don't even notice. Which is true, although fetishisms are a much more complex topic than this. Technically, a fetish is the displacement of erotic interests from a partner onto other objects of desire, isolated body parts, items of clothing, materials, specific sounds, gestures, or other things still. Lately, the idiom "I've got a fetish for something" has become commonplace to indicate a simple preference, but in the case of true fetishisms, the matter is much more serious, since the subject is prey to such an intense obsession that it can border on addiction, compromise their social relations, and even grow to become disabling. The good news is that these pathological forms are the exception, while in most cases the fetish is just the icing on the cake, so to speak, of a way wider sexuality. While we're on it, let me also stress how fetishism and fetish are two different things. In fact, the latter is but an aesthetic subculture where you start with actual fetishes and exaggerate them to the max in a sort of seduction taken beyond the extreme. If tight clothes are sexy, for example, fetish makes them as tight as a second skin. If stiletto heels are fascinating, you raise them to 20 centimeters and more. Breasts get inflated like beach balls, and so on. There are several theories about the origin of fetishisms, but one significant clue comes from the famous case of a gentleman who only got aroused when in the presence of a very precise type of white fabric. After long investigations, it turned out that it was the one used in the uniforms of nurses who cared for him when, as a premature baby, their contact was the only form of physical pleasure he could experience. Another element comes from a research where lab rats were made to repeatedly mate with female mice wearing a sort of mini jacket. When they were finally left free to choose their partners, they always chose the jacketed ones, and they even didn't show any interest for nude rodents. In a pinch, it seems that the mechanism is based on associating a particular sensory stimulation to one's first sexual pleasures, even before puberty. The first times it's a coincidence, then you even unconsciously try to find again that stimulation, and in the long run you cannot do without it anymore.
Let me interrupt you just a sec for an important reminder. The episode notes contain all the links to the topics mentioned in the podcast, and if you want to dig deeper, you will find hundreds of further articles on the Ayzad.com website.
The very personal dynamic out of which fetishisms are born makes them literally infinite. You go from relatively common items like feet and footwear to truly surprising ones, such as trypsolagnia, which is an unhealthy passion for washing your hair and shampoo, dendrophilia, meaning getting horny for plants, or haematophilia, or exclusive attraction toward clumsy or sexually incompetent persons. It is comforting to know that truly dangerous fetishes are far and few. The most frequently denounced one is stealing lingerie put out dry, while the scariest one is symphorophilia. Those suffering from it can only reach orgasm by causing disasters. The most famous case was the German serial killer Peter Korten, who in the 1930s begged his wife to call the police when, after 3 decades of murders, he felt the compulsion to burn up an orphanage. Even without getting so extreme, though, there is in fact a whole branch of so-called antisocial fetishisms whose fun consists in challenging the rules of civil living. Some eproctolaniacs, for example, cultivate the art of fouling rooms with their farts. Nosophils, also known with the Japanese term Allione, simulate being the victims of terrible accidents to enjoy the reactions of others, and those into the messy and wet genre get their kicks by soiling themselves and the places they are in with sticky stuff like paint, mud, or pies thrown in each other's face like in the old Laurel and Hardy shorts. Let's all praise the internet then, that gave to all kinds of fetishists the opportunity to find partners sharing their tastes, even if it may involve a little bit of traveling, which didn't stop balloon fetishists to form two large factions locked in a perennial grudge. On one side you have those who find blowing them up arousing, and on the other those who would never accept such an insult. An interesting trivia is that the entire modern philosophy was born out of a fetishism. In his youth, René Descartes, the "I think therefore I am" one, was tormented by such a deep obsession for cross-eyed women that he couldn't find any satisfying relationship. While wondering about this mania, he managed to remember that the first person he felt somehow attracted to as a child was a little girl with that feature. The realization was enough to regain control of his passions. We don't know how his wife's eyes were like, and as a matter of fact I don't even know whether he ever got married, but reading his Principia Philosophica you discover that that very episode convinced him of the validity of free will and of the control of the rational mind over the body. The rest of the Western wisdom all derives from there.
The Sexual Explorers Manifesto is a global initiative to spread a healthier and more positive approach to sexuality. You can easily find it with an online search, but in the meantime, let's take a closer look at one of its 15 items. Today's one says:
Sexuality is fluid and ever-evolving. Although sex is traditionally presented by culture and media as monolithic and unchangeable, the simple observation of human behavior shows that reality is very different. In fact, it is evident how age, experience, or simple curiosity lead to the developing erotic interests that may vary with time, overlap, or replace past ones. This is the normal approach, actually healthier than entrenching on the compulsive repetition of a rigid pattern.
This is your moment. In every episode, we pick one question among those sent to our expert at podcast@ayzad.com. So let's get writing to get an answer like this.
This is the last email from my archives. With the next episode of Exploring Unusual Sex, we'll switch to the messages you sent directly to the podcast. Meanwhile, Stefano is up with one of those doubts that keep me awake at night too, namely, with all your work with weird sex, you are the right person to solve the curiosity I have. What is the most absurd porn video you've ever stumbled upon? So, the official answer is I couldn't say, since what looks odd to me can be totally mundane for someone else, and it is not right to rank this sort of stuff. The truth, however, is that there is more than one valid answer. As a rule of thumb, if you're looking for truly screwball material, you just have to turn to Japan. Not because people are especially crazy over there, but because their pornography laws explicitly forbid to show the genitals, which in fact you will probably have noticed are censored with laughable effects, such as digital mosaics or oversized band-aids slapped on the most uncomfortable of spots. For this reason, local producers continuously invent workarounds to portray stuff they consider arousing yet legal. Bukkake videos, say, were thought up in 1998 by one Mr. Katsuhiko Matsumoto to show lots of ejaculations without having to put their responsibles in the frame. These stunts are known on the whole as kikaku, simply meaning video project, and they also include rather psychopathic ideas like putting a dildo on top of a rocket aimed at the actress, engineering pranks where a bondage model suddenly finds herself hanging from a 30-meter tall industrial crane, or retelling Power Rangers adventures as porn. Moving on to more complex productions, I'd suggest the 1973 movie Liebesgrüße aus der Lederhosen that, just to give you an idea, went head-to-head with global success like The Godfather in German cinemas for several weeks. On my website you can find its trailer, which is quite unsettling, as it kick-started the Bavarian porn genre, a sort of lewder teenage comedy set among mountain cabins, raising cows, guys with feathered hats, yodels, and so on. The cusp of absurdity could also be the legendary Café Flash, a 1982 movie conceived to be the first and only postmodernist porn ever. I will only say that its signature pieces are a man with a giant pencil for a head and cannibal babies. Is that enough for you? After solving this doubt too, I want to remind everyone that sex should always be a pleasure, not a problem, even when it is uncommon. However, if you are experiencing issues, I can help you as a personal coach to discover together the ideal strategy to win back your happiness in this field. You can get in touch through my website ayzad.com, spelled A-Y-Z-A-D, and saying you are a listener of this podcast will earn you a 20% discount on the first session.
This episode is almost over, but we still have time to read one entry from XXX, the Dictionary of Unusual Sex, available in online bookstores everywhere, but in Italian only for the moment.
Today's entry is cicisbeo, a typical figure of 18th century Italy where nobles married for power in arranged weddings, and it was a given that there was no passion at all between the spouses. Therefore, the custom was to ensure a progeny as quickly as possible, then they satisfied their sexual needs with others. The cicisbeo, or gallant, was the noblewoman full-time chaperone, whose job was to embody an ideal of courtly love by flattering her, making her look good socially, and realizing her every wish. Semi-officially, such wishes included in private sexual requests too, just as much as the husband entertained semi-official relations with mistresses and prostitutes. The cicisbeo rose to an important social role, glorified even in the arts and with some famous exponents. This notwithstanding, when the concept of romantic love spread in the 19th century, it destroyed the foundations for this figure's very existence, rapidly making it extinct. And that really was it. Before leaving you with one last unusual sex fact, I want to thank you for listening and invite you to follow me on my social networks and above all on my website ayzad.com, which is also the ideal place to sign up for my newsletter. That way you'll get straight in your inbox new articles, reviews, invitations to events, and the notification for new podcast episodes which you can listen to and comment pretty much everywhere, like iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, and so on. If you liked exploring unusual sex, I would also like to invite you to fill the Tell Me About You form you can find linked in the episode notes, so you will help me make the next episodes even better and closer to your tastes. Finally, you can also lend a hand by telling your friends about this podcast and writing about it on your social networks. Thanks, and before moving on to the next episode, here's the fact I promised you. Each older brother of a male raises by 33% the probability for the younger to be gay.